My father told me not to expect anything, and I didn't, until I watched my sister's kids unwrap a trip to Hawaii while mine held up socks. My mother just smiled her placid smile. So I took my children and walked out, and the next day I made one Facebook post that set our entire family tree on fire. This is where the story truly begins, and you won't want to miss what happens. Make sure you're subscribed to see it through to the end. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The scent of pine needles and roasting turkey usually filled me with a comforting sense of nostalgia. But this year, it was just the cloying perfume of a performance I could no longer endure. I sat on my parents' stiff, antique sofa, a forced smile plastered on my face, feeling the familiar tension coil in my stomach. My husband, David, sensing my unease, rested a warm hand on my knee, a silent gesture of solidarity that I clung to like a life raft. Across the room, my 9-year-old daughter, Sophie, and 6-year-old son, Ben, sat on the floor, their eyes wide with the innocent, unblemished excitement of Christmas. It was always the same. Every holiday, every birthday, every family gathering was a carefully staged play in which my younger sister, Chloe, was the star, and I was a background character, meant to applaud on cue. For years, I had accepted my role. I was the responsible one, the easy child, the one who never asked for anything because I had learned early on that asking was futile. I had built a life for myself, a good one, with a loving husband, 2 wonderful children, and a fulfilling career at a nonprofit. I didn't need my parents' help, and they seemed grateful for it. It absolved them of any obligation. The gift exchange began. My father, Richard, played the part of the magnanimous patriarch, handing out presents with a flourish. Chloe's husband, a slick real estate developer named Greg, received a ridiculously expensive watch. Chloe herself unwrapped a designer handbag that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Her 2 children, a pair of perfectly coiffed 7-year-olds, tore into boxes revealing the latest tablets and a mountain of toys that would soon be forgotten. Then it was our turn. Dad handed Sophie and Ben each a small, soft package. They ripped it open with enthusiasm, their faces a study in polite confusion. Socks. They were nice socks, woolen and colorful, but they were still just socks. Sophie, ever the diplomat, immediately said, "Thank you, Grandpa, they look warm." Ben just stared at his, then at his cousin's pile of gadgets. I saw the light in his eyes dim just a little, a flicker of childhood disappointment that felt like a physical blow. David and I received matching sets. I swallowed the lump in my throat, preparing to move on, to smooth over the awkwardness as I always did. But then came the grand finale. Dad cleared his throat, a theatrical sound that commanded the room's attention. And for Chloe and her wonderful family, a little something to get away from it all. He handed her a large, golden envelope. Chloe opened it dramatically, her eyes widening. She pulled out a glossy brochure and a set of plane tickets. "Oh, Daddy," she gasped, her voice dripping with practiced surprise. "Hawaii, for 2 weeks, you shouldn't have." The room erupted in applause, led by my mother, Carol, whose smile was so bright it looked painful. I watched as Chloe's children jumped up and down, squealing about beaches and volcanoes. And in that moment, watching my own kids look on from their small corner, clutching their new socks, something inside me finally snapped. It wasn't about the money. It wasn't about the trip. It was about the blatant, unapologetic declaration of their worth. My sister's family was worthy of paradise. Mine was worthy of keeping their feet warm. I tried to catch my mother's eye, searching for a hint of empathy, of acknowledgement. She met my gaze for a fleeting second, and her smile faltered into a tight, apologetic line before she turned back to bask in Chloe's reflected glory. Later, as the chaos died down, I found my father in the kitchen pouring himself another glass of scotch. I kept my voice low, steady. "Dad, about the gifts." He didn't even turn to look at me. "What about them? You got socks, they're practical." The kids were a little confused, I said, my voice trembling slightly despite my best efforts. Seeing their cousins get tablets and then a vacation to Hawaii, it's a little hard for them to understand. He finally turned, his eyes cold and dismissive. He took a sip of his drink and leveled a look at me that he'd been perfecting my entire life. "Isabella," he said, his voice flat, "I've told you for years not to expect anything from me. You and David do just fine on your own. You don't need my help." His words were a dismissal, not just of the moment, but of my entire existence within they. Family, I was being punished for my independence, the very quality he claimed to admire. The injustice of it was suffocating. I walked back into the living room, where my mother was helping Chloe look up resorts on her new tablet. "Mom," I whispered, pulling her aside, "did you see their faces, Ben and Sophie?" She patted my arm, her touch light and meaningless. "Oh, honey, don't make a scene, it's just how life is. Your father, he just wants to help Chloe. Her business is so demanding." She smiled that serene, placid smile, the one she used to smooth over every crack in our family's foundation. "It's not personal." But it was personal. It was a lifetime of being told, in 1,000 different ways, that I was less important, less loved, less worthy. I looked at my children, who were now quietly stacking coasters on a side table, having already forgotten their disappointing gifts. I looked at David, his jaw tight with a fury he was holding back for my sake. "Get your coats," I said to my kids, my voice clear and firm. David's head snapped up. Relief washed over his face. He stood immediately. "Kids, let's go." My mother's smile finally vanished. "Isabella, where are you going? We haven't even had dessert." "We're leaving," I said, helping Ben into his small jacket. I didn't look at her. I couldn't. If I did, her practiced look of wounded motherhood might weaken my resolve. "Don't be so dramatic," my father boomed from the doorway. I finally turned to face them, the two architects of my lifelong emotional balancing act. I looked from my father's stony expression to my mother's bewildered one, to my sister, who was watching with a smirk of detached amusement. "Thank you for the socks," I said, and with my children's hands held firmly in mine, I walked out of that house, leaving 36 years of quiet acceptance behind me on the doorstep. The cold night air felt like the first breath of freedom. The cruelty wasn't in the disparity of the gifts, it was in their utter shamelessness about it. The drive home was silent, thick with things unsaid. David drove, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. In the back, Sophie and Ben had fallen asleep, their heads leaning against the windows, their faces peaceful in the glow of the passing streetlights. They were too young to understand the complex dynamics of what had just happened, but they had felt the sting of it. That was enough. The silence in the car wasn't empty. It was a space for my own anger to finally breathe. It grew and expanded, pushing out the hurt and replacing it with a cold, hard clarity. When we got home, David put the kids to bed while I stood in our kitchen, staring at the cheerful, untouched gingerbread house we had decorated as a family just days before. It seemed like a relic from another life. The warmth of our home, usually a source of comfort, felt like a spotlight on everything my parents' house was not. David came up behind me and wrapped his arms around my waist, resting his chin on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" he asked softly. "No," I said, my voice raw. "But I think I will be. I'm done, David, I'm just done." "I'm proud of you for walking out," he said, his voice firm. "I've wanted to do that for the last 10 Christmases. Seeing the look on Ben's face tonight, I never want him to feel that way again. Or Sophie." We stood there for a long time, drawing strength from each other. Later, as I was getting ready for bed, my phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. "Your father is very upset. You embarrassed us in front of the whole family. Please call me." I stared at the message, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. Embarrassed them. There was no concern for me, no apology for my children, just a reflexive defense of their perfect family image. I didn't reply. I turned the phone off and placed it on the nightstand, feeling a surprising sense of power in the simple act of creating silence. But sleep didn't come easily. My father's words echoed in my mind. "I told you not to expect anything from me." He had said it so many times over the years, a mantra to absolve himself of parental duty. It was his get-out-of-jail-free card for every forgotten birthday, every missed school play, every time I had needed him and he had been too busy, usually with something for Chloe. Lying in the dark, I started to connect the dots, not just emotionally, but financially. Chloe's demanding boutique business. My parents had given her the seed money for it, a loan I knew would never be repaid. They had co-signed the lease on her upscale storefront. When she wanted to launch a new clothing line, they had funded her trip to Europe for inspiration. Meanwhile, when David and I were scraping together a down payment for our modest starter home, my father had offered us a lecture on fiscal responsibility. When I'd started my own career, I'd done it through scholarships and student loans, which I was still paying off. The disparity wasn't just a matter of holiday gifts, it was the foundation of our family. Chloe was a subsidized entity, an investment. I was a self-sustaining, independent branch, and they were content to prune me away. A new thought began to form in my mind, a slow-burning ember of an idea. For years, I had held a small, unique position of power within the family, one I had never considered using. A few years ago, my mother, obsessed with ancestry and projecting the image of a close-knit clan, had begged me to create a family Facebook page. She had called it the Miller Family Heritage. My marketing skills made me the obvious choice to run it. I posted old black-and-white photos of our great-grandparents, shared news of births and anniversaries, and curated a digital scrapbook of a happy, thriving family. It was followed by every last aunt, uncle, and cousin scattered across the country. They saw only the polished version of us, the version my parents wanted them to see. An internal monologue, a quiet voice I'd suppressed for years, started to get louder. They've forgotten what I do for a living. They've forgotten that I know how to manage a message. The next morning, my phone was filled with more texts. One from my mother. "Isabella, this is ridiculous. You're tearing the family apart over a silly gift." And one from Chloe. "Seriously, what is your problem? You always have to make everything about you. Just grow up." Her message was the final push I needed. The casual cruelty, the complete lack of self-awareness, it was breathtaking. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee growing cold in my hands, and opened my laptop. I navigated to the Miller Family Heritage page, its cheerful banner photo of a long-dead ancestor staring back at me. I could hear my mother's voice in my head from the day she'd asked me to create it. "It's so important that everyone sees what a loving family we are, Ellie." At the time, she'd still used my childhood nickname. I looked at the Create Post button, my heart pounding. David walked in, saw the look on my face, and knew immediately. He simply poured himself a coffee and sat down across from me, a silent guardian. They had forgotten one crucial thing, I thought, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. They had forgotten that stories were my profession. I didn't just market for a nonprofit. I told stories that moved people, that revealed truths, that inspired action. And I was about to tell the truest story of all. To understand the depth of that Christmas Day betrayal, you have to understand the foundation it was built on. My entire life, I was the pillar, and Chloe was the vine that grew around it, adorned and celebrated for the very support it couldn't provide itself. I was the child who learned to ride a bike on my own after my dad got tired of holding the seat. Chloe got a brand new 10-speed with a custom-painted helmet, and Dad ran alongside her for weeks until she was perfectly steady. When I got my first A on a difficult physics test, my father glanced at it and said, "Good, that's what you're supposed to do." When Chloe brought home a macaroni art project, it was framed and hung in the hallway. My role as the self-sufficient one was cemented early. I got a part-time job at 16 to save for a car. Chloe was given a convertible for her 17th birthday because she needed something reliable. I worked my way through college, juggling classes and 3 different jobs, proud of my independence. My parents spoke of it with a detached admiration, as if I were a distant relative they read about in the paper. "Isabella is so resourceful," my mother would tell her friends. It wasn't a compliment, it was a justification for their neglect. Their financial support for Chloe was a constant, open secret. The boutique, Chloe's Closet, was her passion project, but it was my parents' money that made it a reality. Richard, my father, was a retired financial advisor who had done very well for himself. He spoke of smart investments, and apparently Chloe was his prize portfolio. He'd visit her shop, offering unsolicited advice, puffing out his chest as customers browsed the racks of overpriced clothing. He saw her not as a daughter, but as a reflection of his own success. Carol, my mother, was the master of emotional manipulation, the soft-spoken enabler who kept the system running. Her specialty was making me feel guilty for having any needs at all. If I ever expressed even a hint of frustration, she would sigh and say, "Oh, honey, don't put that on your father. His heart isn't strong. You know how Chloe's ventures stress him out." She painted their blatant favoritism as a form of parental anxiety, a burden they had to bear for their more fragile daughter. My strength was used as a weapon against me. Because I could handle things on my own, I was expected to. Chloe, for her part, had fully embraced the role of the golden child. She wasn't overtly malicious, not in a way you could easily call out. Instead, she operated with a kind of sublime, unshakable entitlement. She floated through life on a cloud of parental subsidy, genuinely believing she had earned it all. Her conversations were littered with casual references to her European buying trips, her spa weekends, her kitchen renovation. She never seemed to notice, or care, that David and I were clipping coupons and saving for months to afford a family weekend at a state park. I remember one family dinner a year before the infamous Christmas. Chloe was talking about the stress of finding a reliable nanny for her twins. "It's just so hard," she'd lamented, swirling a glass of expensive wine. "We need someone who can travel with us at a moment's notice." My mother had looked at her with profound sympathy. "Of course, dear, you have so much on your plate." Later that evening, I mentioned that my nonprofit was facing budget cuts, and I was worried about potential layoffs. My father had grunted from behind his newspaper. "Well, that's why you don't go into a field that doesn't make money, Isabella." My mother had just smiled that vacant, placating smile. "Your father is just being practical, dear." The dynamic was perfectly illustrated by their approach to our children. Chloe's kids were treated like visiting royalty. My parents' house was filled with toys exclusively for them. My mother would babysit them at the drop of a hat. When Sophie had a school play, my parents had a prior commitment. When Chloe's daughter had a 5-minute dance recital, they sat in the front row with a bouquet of roses. This history was the fuel for the fire that Christmas night. It wasn't just about Hawaii versus socks. It was about the convertible versus the bus pass. The framed macaroni art versus the ignored report card. The subsidized business versus the lecture on fiscal responsibility. It was the crushing weight of 1,000 tiny cuts that had finally bled me dry. My father's coldness was, in a way, easier to handle than my mother's gentle gaslighting. Richard was a rock. You knew he wouldn't move. But Carol was the water, slowly and persistently eroding my sense of reality, making me question if I was the crazy one for wanting fairness. Her constant refrain, "It's just how things are," was a lullaby meant to keep me asleep. But I was awake now, and as I sat at my laptop, the cursor blinking on the screen of the family heritage page, I saw them all with perfect, painful clarity. My father, the smug architect of this unequal empire. My sister, the blissfully unaware queen. And my mother, the silent, smiling diplomat who ensured the peace was kept, no matter the cost to me. They were a 3-person system, perfectly balanced and self-sustaining. They had forgotten that systems can be disrupted, especially by the person you've trained to be resourceful. The decision was made. The years of swallowing my feelings, of accepting the crumbs from the family table, were over. My passive disappointment had finally crystallized into active strategy. I wasn't going to scream or cry or send them a furious text message. That's what they expected. They would dismiss it as Isabella being dramatic again. No, I was going to use the very tool they'd handed me, the wholesome, curated family Facebook page, to simply and quietly hold up a mirror. My plan wasn't a trap in the sense of a malicious scheme. It was a trap of transparency. The Miller Family Heritage page was my parents' proudest creation, a public relations campaign for their legacy. It was built on a foundation of carefully selected truths, happy birthdays, smiling anniversaries, sepia-toned photos of hardworking ancestors. It was all true, but it was an incomplete truth. I was about to provide the missing data. My professional life was all about narrative. At the nonprofit, I crafted campaigns that showed the stark reality of our community's needs, not through angry tirades, but through compelling, fact-based stories. I knew that the most powerful message wasn't delivered in an emotional outburst, but in a calm, undeniable presentation of facts. The contrast between my sister's vacation and my children's socks was a fact. I was simply going to report it. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I chose my words with surgical precision, adopting the cheerful, slightly folksy tone I always used for the page. I found a picture from the day before, one Chloe had already posted on her own social media. Her family beaming, holding up the glossy travel brochure for Hawaii, the tickets fanned out like a winning hand of cards. Then I took a new photo. My own children, Sophie and Ben, sitting on our living room rug, smiling genuinely and holding up their colorful, new woolen socks. I created the post. "What a wonderful Christmas celebration at the Miller house yesterday," I began. "It's always so lovely to see the whole family together, and a special time for gift giving. We wanted to share some of the amazing highlights. A huge congratulations to Chloe, Greg, and their kids on their incredible gift from Mom and Dad, a 2-week, all-expenses-paid trip to Hawaii. We are all so excited for you and can't wait to see the pictures." I inserted Chloe's photo. Then I continued. "And our little ones, Sophie and Ben, were so grateful for their warm winter socks from Grandma and Grandpa. Perfect for these cold winter months." I attached the photo of my kids. I reread the post twice. It was perfect. There wasn't a single malicious word in it. It was relentlessly, brutally positive. I added a final, saccharine sign-off, feeling so blessed to be part of such a generous family. "Happy holidays, everyone." And then I clicked post. The immediate aftermath was silence. For about an hour, nothing happened. I imagined the post appearing on the phones of my dozens of cousins, aunts, and uncles across the country. I pictured them reading it, their brows furrowing in confusion. They all knew I was the responsible, no-fuss daughter and Chloe was the high-flying one, but the raw data of the gifts, presented side by side, was something they couldn't have imagined. The first reaction was a single like from a second cousin in Oregon, then another from my Aunt Martha. Then came the first comment from a cousin named Sarah. "Wow, Hawaii, that's amazing, and cozy socks are the best, haha." The haha was doing a lot of heavy lifting. It was the social signal of someone sensing deep awkwardness but not knowing what to say. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Sarah. "Hey, just saw your post. Is everything okay?" Before I could reply, another text came in, this time from my Uncle Bill. "Isabella, your mother just called Martha in a panic. What is going on with that Facebook post?" The floodgates were opening. My strategy was working even better than I'd anticipated. I hadn't accused anyone of anything. I had simply presented the information and allowed the extended family to draw their own conclusions. And they were. The contrast was too stark, too jarring to be ignored. My phone started ringing. It was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. It rang again immediately. My father. I ignored that call too. David watched me, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You've kicked the beehive, haven't you?" "I just shared the family news," I said, my own smile finally breaking free. It felt incredible. It felt like justice. The real investigation wasn't about uncovering a hidden crime. It was about forcing a public audit of my parents' long-hidden emotional and financial ledger. For decades, they had operated without oversight. Their favoritism was a private family matter, easily denied and swept under the rug. But by posting it on the family's public forum, I had invited everyone to be an auditor. The cousins and aunts and uncles who had only ever heard my parents' version of the story, of the resourceful daughter and the ambitious one, were now faced with an undeniable piece of evidence. The story they'd been told wasn't matching the picture they were seeing. The quiet, polite family heritage page had just become the site of a full-blown shareholder revolt. The digital explosion I had detonated took about 2 hours to reach its epicenter, my parents' house. My phone became a switchboard of familial shock and confusion. Texts from cousins I hadn't spoken to in years popped up one after another. OMG, Izzy, is that post for real? A trip to Hawaii. My mom said your dad told her business was slow. Socks, that is savage. The family grapevine, now supercharged by social media, was working with breathtaking efficiency. The carefully constructed image of Richard and Carol Miller as the fair-minded, generous heads of a loving family was crumbling in real time. They had nowhere to hide because I had used their own stage to tell the story. Then came the call I knew was inevitable. My phone rang, displaying Mom. I took a deep breath, looked at David, who gave me a nod of encouragement, and answered. Isabella Marie Miller, you take that post down right this instant. My mother's voice was a high-pitched shriek, stripped of all its usual soft, placating tones. The mask was off. I don't know what you're talking about, I said calmly, my voice a placid sea against her storm. It's a happy post. I was just sharing the family's good news, like you always ask me to. You know exactly what you're doing, she sputtered. You're trying to humiliate us. Your Aunt Patty called, your Uncle Bill called, everyone is calling. They think we're monsters. I never said you were monsters, Mom. I just said you gave Chloe a trip to Hawaii and you gave my kids socks. Both of those things are true, aren't they? The simple, unassailable logic of it left her speechless for a second. Then my father grabbed the phone. His voice was a low growl, the one he used when he felt his authority was being challenged. Listen to me, he said, dispensing with any preamble. You have 5 minutes to delete that post, or you will regret it. It was the classic threat of a man used to unquestioning obedience. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of him. What could he possibly do? Write me out of a will I was never in, withhold affection he never gave. Regret what exactly? I asked, my voice still even. What are you going to take away from me, Dad? You can't take away my house because I bought it. You can't take away my career because I built it. You can't take away my family because David and Sophie and Ben are right here. So please, tell me what I'm supposed to be afraid of. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I had just dismantled his entire arsenal of power in 4 sentences. He was left with nothing but impotent rage. You are an ungrateful, spiteful child, he finally managed to say, his voice thick with fury. I'm not ungrateful, I replied. I'm just not pretending anymore. For 36 years, I've pretended not to notice. I pretended it didn't hurt. I pretended for the sake of keeping the peace. But the peace was just for you, not for me. I'm done keeping it. I could hear Chloe in the background now, her voice rising. Tell her she's jealous. She's always been jealous of me. Is that what you think this is about? I asked, loud enough for her to hear. Jealousy? No, Chloe, this is about fairness. This is about watching my 6-year-old son's face fall when he realized his grandparents think his cousins are worth a tropical vacation and he's worth a pair of socks. This was never about me wanting what you have. It's about me wanting my children to feel like they matter as much as yours do. My mother got back on the phone, her voice now shifting from anger to a desperate, wheedling tone. Isabella, please, think of the family's reputation. What will people think? They'll think the truth, I said simply, and maybe that's a good thing for a change. I ended the call. My hand was trembling, but not from fear. It was from adrenaline, from the sheer, exhilarating release of finally speaking my truth. I had met their anger not with matching hysteria, but with cold, hard facts. Their threats had dissolved against the shield of my independence. Their attempts to paint me as jealous or dramatic had been exposed for what they were, a desperate attempt to avoid accountability. The true reveal of that confrontation wasn't about the gifts. It was about their characters. When challenged, my father's magnanimous patriarch persona shattered into that of a petty tyrant. My mother's gentle matriarch image evaporated, revealing a frantic socialite terrified of what the neighbors might think. And Chloe's self-perception as a successful, independent businesswoman was exposed as a complete fiction, propped up by a lifetime of handouts. They weren't the people they pretended to be on the family heritage page. And now, everyone knew it. The trap had sprung, and they had walked right into it, exposing themselves more thoroughly than I ever could have alone. My parents' first move after the disastrous phone call was to try and regain control of the narrative. My mother began a frantic campaign of damage control, calling relatives and spinning a new story. "I was having a hard time," she would say in a hushed, concerned voice. "I was misinterpreting their generosity. I was reading too much into a simple Christmas gift." It was a classic strategy: paint the whistleblower as unstable. Simultaneously, Chloe launched her own attack. She posted a flurry of photos on her personal social media, beaming selfies from her chic boutique, throwback pictures of her and our parents looking like the perfect family, and a long, rambling caption about how blessed she was to have such supportive parents who always encouraged her dreams. It was a transparent attempt to drown out my single, quiet post with a flood of curated happiness. She even sent me a private message filled with a mix of insults and faux pity. "I'm sorry you're so unhappy with your life, Isabella. Maybe you should focus on your own family instead of being so obsessed with mine." But they underestimated the audience. Our extended family wasn't a group of strangers, they were people who had known us our whole lives. My post had provided a key, unlocking decades of small, half-forgotten observations. My Aunt Martha called me. "You know, honey," she said, "it all makes sense now. I remember when you graduated from college, summa cum laude, and your parents didn't even throw you a party." But when Chloe got her 2-year business certificate, they hosted that huge catered affair at the country club. Another cousin reached out. "I never understood why your dad was always complaining about money to my dad, but then we'd see pictures of Chloe on another trip to Europe. We just assumed you were all doing incredibly well." The anecdote started pouring in, creating a mosaic of long-term, systematic favoritism. My single post hadn't just been a statement, it had been a catalyst for a collective memory. The case against my parents wasn't just being built by me anymore, it was being crowdsourced by the entire Miller clan. The real escalation, however, came from my father. After his initial threats failed, he switched tactics. He sent me a cold, formal email. The subject line was "Family Financials." In it, he detailed every major expense he and my mother had covered for Chloe over the years: the down payment for her first condo, the initial investment for her boutique, the money for her lavish wedding. He framed it as a loan to her business, an investment in her future. At the end of the email, he wrote, "We have given you and your family things as well. We paid for Sophie's summer camp 2 years ago, $500, and contributed to Ben's dental work last year, $1,000. To suggest we are not fair is a slanderous accusation." He thought he was proving his fairness. Instead, he had just handed me irrefutable proof of the massive disparity. A few $1,000s over several years for me versus what I knew was well over $100,000 for my sister. He had, in his own arrogant hand, confirmed my entire point. He had built my case for me. This email was my moment of truth. I knew what I had to do next. I forwarded the email to David with a simple note. He sent the receipts. That evening, a second, more powerful confrontation occurred. My parents, realizing their individual efforts were failing, drove to my house unannounced. I saw their car pull into the driveway and felt a jolt of anxiety, but it was quickly replaced by resolve. David stood beside me as I opened the door. "We need to talk," my father said, trying to push past me into the house. "We can talk right here," I said, holding my ground in the doorway. "You have made a mockery of this family," he seethed. "No," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "You did, I just turned on the lights." My mother started to cry, a performance of wounded motherhood I had seen 1,000 times. "Isabella, how could you do this to me? To your father? After everything we've done for you." "What have you done, Mom?" I asked, my voice cutting through her theatrics. What have you ever done for me? Dad seems to think that paying for a summer camp once makes up for funding Chloe's entire adult life. He was even kind enough to put it all in an email for me. My father's face went pale. He hadn't expected me to use his own words against him. That was a private family matter. It stopped being a private matter when you made my children feel worthless on Christmas Day, I shot back. This isn't just about money anymore. This is about the lies you've built this family on. The lie that you're fair. The lie that you're supportive of both your daughters. The lie that you're the people everyone in the family thinks you are. Chloe, who had apparently been waiting in the car, now stormed up the walkway. You are ruining my life, she screamed at me. My business partners are asking questions. People are talking. Good, I said, looking directly at her. Let them talk. Maybe for the first time, they're talking about the truth. The spell was broken. My sister's rage, my father's blustering, my mother's tears, none of it worked on me anymore. They were like actors on a stage who had just realized the audience was gone. They had no power here. I had the truth, and now, thanks to my father's ill-conceived email, I had the proof. They stood on my doorstep, exposed and powerless, and for the first time, I felt truly free of them. I think you should go, I said, my voice devoid of anger. There was nothing left but a vast, empty space where my sense of obligation used to be. I closed the door on their stunned faces, the sound of the click echoing like a final, definitive word. The annual Miller family New Year's Day brunch was my mother's pride and joy. It was an institution, a command performance for every local relative. It was always held at my parents' house, a showcase for my mother's hosting skills and my father's patriarchal generosity. This year, the invitations had gone out before Christmas, and after the events of the past week, a palpable tension hung over the occasion. I knew most of the extended family was attending out of a morbid sense of curiosity. They were coming for the drama. David and I debated not going, but I realized that my absence would allow my parents to control the narrative. They could paint me as the unstable daughter who had cut off her loving family. Showing up was a power move. It was a declaration that I was not hiding and I was not ashamed. When we walked in, the chattering room fell into a sudden, awkward silence. All eyes turned to us. My mother, her face a mask of strained cordiality, rushed over. Isabella, David, I was so worried you wouldn't come, she said, her voice loud enough for everyone to hear. It was a performance, casting her as the forgiving mother welcoming her wayward child. I just smiled. We wouldn't miss it, Mom. Chloe and her family were huddled in a corner with my father, a tight knot of defiance. She shot me a look of pure venom. I ignored her and began to circulate, greeting my aunts, uncles, and cousins. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken questions. People were polite but distant, unsure of whose side to be on. The climax came, as I knew it would, during my father's traditional New Year's toast. He stood by the fireplace, glass of champagne in hand, and began his usual speech about family, legacy, and gratitude. And as we look to the new year, he said, his eyes sweeping the room, we are reminded of what is truly important: family, loyalty, and supporting one another through thick and thin. He paused, and his gaze landed directly on me. And we also learn about forgiveness. We learn to forgive those who, perhaps out of confusion or unhappiness in their own lives, try to cause division. The entire room stiffened. It was a direct, public condemnation. He was using his platform to paint me as the villain, the sole source of all the recent division. In that moment, I saw the endgame. He would publicly shame me into silence, re-establishing his authority and ending the rebellion. But I was ready. As he finished his toast and the room filled with polite, hesitant applause, I stepped forward. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't look angry. I simply held up my phone. I'd like to propose a toast as well, I said, my voice clear and steady. The room went dead silent. My father's face darkened. I'd like to toast to transparency, I began, looking around at the faces of my relatives. This past week has been full of revelations. Many of you have reached out, confused by a post I made. My father just spoke of support, and I wanted to share an example of that support he was kind enough to email me. I turned my phone screen towards my cousin Sarah, who was standing nearby. I had the email my father sent me open. My father, in an effort to demonstrate his fairness, sent me a list of the financial support he has provided to both his daughters. For my sister, Chloe, it includes the down payment on her condo, the six-figure investment to start her boutique, her wedding, and numerous other expenses. For me, I paused, looking directly at my father. It includes $500 for summer camp and $1,000 for my son's dental work. I just want to thank him publicly for his email. It cleared up so much confusion for me, and I hope it does for all of you too. A collective gasp went through the room. My father was frozen, his face a mottled shade of red. My mother looked like she was about to faint. Chloe, however, completely lost her composure. "She's lying," she shrieked, stepping forward. "She's twisting everything." "Am I?" I asked calmly, not taking my eyes off my father. "Dad, is the email I'm showing everyone fake? Did you or did you not write that you invested in Chloe's future while lecturing me on being fiscally responsible?" He couldn't answer. He just stood there, speechless, his authority utterly dismantled in front of the very people he sought to rule. Then, the final, triumphant moment came from an unexpected source. My Aunt Patty, my father's own sister, who had always been his staunchest defender, walked slowly towards me. She looked at my phone, then looked at her brother. Her face was a mask of profound disappointment. "Richard," she said, her voice trembling with emotion, "our father would be so ashamed of you. He taught us that a family name was built on integrity, not on balance sheets and favorites." She turned away from him and came to me, placing a hand on my arm. "I believe you, Isabella. I am so sorry we never saw it." That was it. The dam broke. One by one, other relatives came forward, offering me a quiet word of support, a touch on the shoulder, a sad, knowing look in my parents' direction. My public humiliation had backfired spectacularly. In his attempt to shame me, he had only shamed himself. Chloe, seeing her support system evaporate, grabbed her husband's arm and stormed out of the house, her children trailing behind her in confusion. My father stood, alone and defeated, by the fireplace. My mother simply sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. I had walked into their house as the accused. I was walking out as the vindicated. I found David, took his hand, and we left without a backward glance, the silent, stunned faces of my family watching us go. The fallout from the New Year's Day brunch was swift and decisive. It wasn't a loud, dramatic explosion, but rather a quiet, seismic shift in the family landscape. The truth, once revealed so publicly, couldn't be put back in its box. My parents, who had built their reputation on a carefully curated image of fairness and family unity, were left isolated in the ruins of their own creation. My Aunt Patty's public rebuke of my father was the turning point. In the days that followed, we received calls and messages from nearly every branch of the family tree. They offered apologies for their willful blindness, shared their own stories of my father's arrogance or my mother's manipulations, and most importantly, they offered their unwavering support to me, David, and our children. It was as if a spell had been broken. We were no longer the difficult, estranged branch of the family. We were just family. My parents attempted one last, desperate measure. My mother sent a mass email to the family, announcing that the Miller Family Heritage page was being shut down due to negative and harmful activity. It was a futile gesture, an attempt to lock the barn door after the horses had already bolted and won the derby. I complied, deleting the page without a word. Its purpose had been served. The financial and social consequences for Chloe were significant. A few of her business partners, who were also distant family friends, quietly pulled their support from her boutique. Her business, which had always been propped up by my parents' endless funding and social connections, began to falter. Without the protective bubble of family favoritism, her entitlement and lack of real business acumen were starkly exposed. She was forced to learn the lesson my father had always lectured me about. The importance of self-sufficiency. A month later, I had a final, quiet conversation with my Aunt Patty. She told me my father had tried to call a family meeting to clear the air, but almost no one had shown up. His reign was over. His social capital within the family, which he had prized above all else, was gone. He and my mother were left with what they had created, a gilded, isolated life with their golden child, whose shine had significantly tarnished. The most important resolution, however, was the one that happened within the walls of my own home. The cloud of resentment and unspoken hurt that had subtly shadowed my life for so long had finally dissipated. I felt lighter. David remarked that he hadn't seen me so relaxed and happy in years. Our life, which had always been good, now felt whole. We were free to create our own traditions, to build our own legacy, unburdened by the weight of my parents' expectations and disappointments. One crisp spring afternoon, several months later, I was in the backyard with Sophie and Ben. We were planting a small vegetable garden, our hands covered in soil. A package was delivered to the front door. It was a small box from a lawyer's office. Inside was a check for a significant, but not life-changing, amount of money and a short, typed letter from my parents. It was a stilted, formal document speaking of a redistribution of family assets and a desire to rectify past imbalances. There was no apology, no warmth, just the cold language of a legal settlement. It was their attempt to fix a deep emotional wound with a financial bandage. I showed the check to David. "What do you want to do with it?" he asked. I thought for a moment, looking out at our children, who were laughing as they watered the newly planted seeds. They were happy, secure, and loved. They knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that they were valued. That was the real inheritance. "Let's put it in their college funds," I said. "All of it." It wasn't forgiveness money. It wasn't hush money. To me, it was simply a refund. A reimbursement for a debt I was no longer trying to collect. My father had once told me not to expect anything from him, and I had finally taken his advice. My peace, my family's happiness, my own self-worth, I had built all of it myself, and it was more valuable than anything he could ever give me.